The summer sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty trail to Monticello, Wyoming Territory, as Rebecca Turner clutched the edge of the wagon seat with white knuckles. A sudden crack of thunder split the sky, making the team of horses jerk forward in panic, sending the wagon lurching toward the swollen creek. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she felt herself sliding off the smooth wooden seat, her desperate grab for the side rail missing by mere inches before she was airborne, then plunging into the churning waters below. Isaac Newcomb was riding the fence line of his ranch when he spotted the wagon careening dangerously close to Devil's Creek. The sight of a woman tumbling from the seat into the rushing water had him digging his heels into his horse's flanks before his mind fully registered what he was seeing. Splashing into the creek without hesitation, he reached the thrashing woman just as her head disappeared beneath the surface. "You're not drowning on my watch," he declared firmly, his strong arm wrapping around her waist as he hauled her to the surface. Her sudden gasp for air and the wild, frightened look in her eyes stirred something deep inside him that he hadn't felt in years. Rebecca coughed violently, water spilling from her lungs as the stranger pulled her toward the bank. Her soaked traveling dress weighed heavily, threatening to drag them both under, but the cowboy's grip never faltered. When they finally reached the shore, she collapsed onto the rocky bank, her entire body trembling. "Thank you," she managed between ragged breaths, pushing sodden auburn hair from her face. "I thought I was going to die." "Not today, madam," Isaac replied, his voice gentler now as he helped her to sit up, "though that was a mighty close call. What brings a lady like yourself out here alone on a day like this?" Rebecca shivered despite the summer heat. "I wasn't alone." The driver, her eyes widened in sudden panic as she looked back toward the creek. "Mr. Peterson, the wagon." Isaac followed her gaze to see the wagon had come to rest against a boulder midstream, but there was no sign of the driver. "Stay here," he instructed, wading back into the water. He returned minutes later, his expression grave. "I'm sorry, madam. Your driver didn't make it." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes. Oh God! The weight of her situation crashed down upon her with crushing force. Stranded in unfamiliar territory, her belongings swept away, and now a man dead because of her journey. "I'm Isaac Newcomb," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "My ranch is just over that rise. We need to get you warm and dry before you catch your death." "Rebecca Turner," she replied, her voice small. "I was headed to Monticello to take a teaching position." Isaac nodded, the ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Well, Miss Turner, you've reached Monticello territory, though not in the way you planned. Let's get you to town after you've had a chance to recover at my place." The Newcomb ranch house was modest but solidly built, standing proud against the vast Wyoming landscape. As they approached on Isaac's horse, Rebecca noticed the meticulous care evident in the well-maintained fences and the healthy livestock grazing on lush pasture. "It's not much," Isaac said, a hint of pride in his voice as he helped her down from the saddle, "but it's mine, free and clear." Inside, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes looked up from her cooking, her mouth forming an O of surprise at the sight of the bedraggled pair. "Martha, this is Miss Turner. She had an accident at Devil's Creek. She needs dry clothes and hot tea," Isaac explained, his hand still steadying Rebecca's elbow. "You poor dear," Martha exclaimed, immediately bustling toward them. "Come with me. I'll find you something to wear while we get your things dried." "My things?" Rebecca's voice caught. "Everything I owned was in that wagon." Isaac exchanged a glance with Martha before addressing Rebecca. "Don't you worry about that now. We'll figure something out. First, let's take care of you." In Martha's room, Rebecca gratefully accepted the borrowed dress, though it hung loosely on her slender frame. Her hands trembled as she pinned her damp hair atop her head. The gravity of her situation was overwhelming alone in an unfamiliar place, her teaching position in jeopardy, and not a single possession to her name. When she emerged, Isaac was waiting in the sitting room, freshly changed himself. He stood when she entered, and she noticed for the first time how tall he was, his shoulders broad beneath his clean shirt. His dark hair was still damp, and his eyes a striking blue that reminded her of deep water regarded her with concern. "Feeling better?" he asked. "Yes, thank you," she replied, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "Mr. Newcomb, I cannot express my gratitude for your heroism today, but I must ask, how will I reach town now? The school term begins in 2 days, and I'm expected at the boarding house tomorrow." Isaac gestured for her to sit. "I've sent my ranch hand, Tom, to town to inform them of the situation. He'll also speak with the sheriff about Mr. Peterson. As for your position, don't fret. Monticello's been waiting for a school teacher for months. They won't turn you away because of circumstances beyond your control." Rebecca sank into the chair, relief washing over her. "You're very kind." Martha appeared with steaming cups of tea. "Drink this, child. It'll warm you up proper." As Rebecca sipped her tea, Isaac studied her thoughtfully. There was something about this woman, a quiet dignity despite her misfortune, that intrigued him. Most ladies he knew would be hysterical after such an ordeal, yet here she sat, concerned more about her obligations than her own comfort. "Miss Turner, if you don't mind my asking, what brings a lady like yourself out west to teach? Most women I know would prefer the comforts of eastern cities." Rebecca's fingers tightened around her cup. "My father passed away last winter. He was a professor at a small college in Massachusetts. With his death came the discovery that his finances were not as secure as I had believed. The house, his books, everything had to be sold to cover his debts." She paused, the memory still raw. "Teaching has always been my passion, and when I saw the advertisement for Monticello, it seemed like providence." Isaac nodded, understanding in his eyes. "A fresh start." "Exactly," she replied, meeting his gaze, "though I imagined it somewhat differently than this." "Life out here rarely goes as planned," Isaac said with a small smile, "but we're resilient folk. You'll find your footing." That evening, over a simple but hearty supper, Rebecca learned more about Isaac Newcomb. He had come to Wyoming Territory 8 years earlier, after the Civil War left him restless and unable to settle back into his family's shipping business in Baltimore. He had built his ranch from nothing, weathering harsh winters, drought, and the constant threat of cattle thieves. "It wasn't easy," he admitted, passing her a plate of Martha's fresh bread, "but there's something about this land that gets into your blood. I can't imagine being anywhere else now." Rebecca found herself captivated by the passion with which he spoke about his ranch. She had never met anyone so thoroughly content with their place in the world. It was refreshing after the stifling social constraints of Boston society, where appearances and connections determined one's worth. "And you, Miss Turner, what made you choose teaching?" Isaac asked. Rebecca smiled, the first genuine smile since her ordeal. "Books were my companions growing up. My mother died when I was young, and father raised me alone. He would read to me every night Shakespeare, Dickens, even Greek mythology. When I was old enough, I began helping him grade papers." It seemed natural to follow in his footsteps. "The children of Monticello are fortunate then," Isaac said, his eyes warm as they met hers across the table. That night, lying in Martha's spare bed, Rebecca stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Wyoming night. The events of the day played through her mind like scenes from a novel: the terrifying plunge into the creek, the strong arms that pulled her to safety, the kindness of strangers who owed her nothing yet offered everything. "You're not drowning on my watch," he had said. Such simple words, yet they had changed the course of her life in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. Morning brought clearer skies and a wagon at the door, driven by the ranch hand Tom. Beside it stood Isaac, dressed in clean clothes, his hat in his hands. "I'll be escorting you to town myself," he explained as Rebecca emerged from the house. "Thought you might feel more comfortable that way, given yesterday's events." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. "That's very considerate, Mr. Newcomb." Martha appeared with a bundle wrapped in cloth. "Some provisions for the journey, and a few necessities I've put together for you, dear. It's not much, but it should tide you over until you can procure new belongings." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears at the woman's generosity. "I don't know how to thank you." "You already have," Martha replied with a smile. "It's been a pleasure having another woman to talk to, even briefly." The journey to Monticello took just over 2 hours. As they traveled, Isaac pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area's settlement. Rebecca found herself laughing at his tales of local characters and the mishaps of his early ranching days. "When I first arrived, I thought raising cattle would be straightforward," he confessed with a chuckle. "I'd read books, you see. Turns out, books don't prepare you for a stampede or for delivering a breech calf in the middle of a blizzard." "I suppose some lessons can only be learned through experience," Rebecca agreed, thinking of her own journey west so different from the adventure she had imagined while planning in her father's study. Monticello revealed itself as they crested a hill, a small but bustling town nestled in a valley, with a church steeple rising above the other buildings. Even from a distance, Rebecca could see the main street was well maintained, with wooden sidewalks and hitching posts outside the establishments. "It's lovely," she breathed, relief flooding through her. This would be her home now. Isaac glanced at her, his expression softening at her obvious delight. "It's a good town, filled with good people. They've been waiting for a teacher with proper training for over a year. The children have been making do with Mrs. Wilson, the preacher's wife, but she'll be grateful to hand over the duties." As they drove down Main Street, Rebecca noticed curious glances directed their way. Isaac nodded acknowledgments to several townspeople as they passed. They stopped in front of a neat 2-story building with a sign that read, "Monticello Boarding House." "This is Mrs. Abernathy's place," Isaac said, helping Rebecca down from the wagon. "She runs the finest boarding house this side of Cheyenne. All the unmarried teachers have stayed here." The door opened before they reached it, revealing a plump woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun. Her stern expression softened when she saw Rebecca. "You must be Miss Turner. We'd about given up hope when you didn't arrive yesterday." Then Tom came with the news of that terrible accident. She turned to Isaac with obvious respect. "Mr. Newcomb, it was good of you to bring her safely to town." "It was no trouble, Mrs. Abernathy," Isaac replied, removing his hat. "Miss Turner has had quite an ordeal, Mrs." Abernathy's face creased with sympathy. "Well, you're here now, dear, and that's what matters. Come in, come in. I've prepared the blue room for you. It has the best light for reading, which I'm told teachers appreciate." Rebecca turned to Isaac, suddenly reluctant to part from the man who had become her unexpected guardian. "Mr. Newcomb, I cannot thank you enough for all you've done." Isaac shifted, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "It was my pleasure, Miss Turner. I'm just grateful I was riding that section of fence when I was." He hesitated, then added, "Perhaps, if it wouldn't be improper, I might call on you once you're settled, to ensure you're adjusting to Monticello life." A warmth spread through Rebecca's chest at his words. "I would like that very much." Mrs. Abernathy cleared her throat pointedly. Monticello is a respectable town, Mr. Newcomb. Should you wish to call on Miss Turner, I expect you to do so during proper visiting hours and in the front parlor. Isaac's eyes crinkled with amusement. Yes, madam. I wouldn't dream of doing otherwise. As he departed, Rebecca watched from the boarding house steps, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. In just 24 hours, her life had been upended, yet she couldn't help feeling that perhaps fate had intervened in the most unexpected way. The blue room was indeed lovely, with a window overlooking the town square and the distant mountains beyond. After the shock of losing all her possessions, Rebecca was touched by Mrs. Abernathy's efforts to make the space welcoming fresh wildflowers in a jar on the dresser, a quilt lovingly stitched in blues and creams on the bed, and a small bookshelf containing several volumes. The mayor's wife organized a collection when we heard about your misfortune, Mrs. Abernathy explained as she showed Rebecca the room. The ladies of Monticello have contributed what they could to help you start anew some clothing, toiletries, and such. Not exactly Boston fashion, I'm afraid, but serviceable. Rebecca was overwhelmed by the community's generosity. This is more than I could have hoped for. Well, we've been desperate for a proper schoolteacher, Mrs. Abernathy admitted frankly. The last one only stayed 3 months before deciding Wyoming was too uncivilized for her tastes. We're hoping you'll be made of sterner stuff. Rebecca straightened her shoulders, determination flooding her veins. I assure you, Mrs. Abernathy, I did not come all this way to retreat at the first sign of hardship. The older woman's face broke into an approving smile. I can see why Isaac Newcomb took a shine to you. He appreciates grit in a person. Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. Mr. Newcomb was simply being a good Samaritan. Was all Mrs. Abernathy said, but her knowing look spoke volumes. That afternoon, Rebecca was introduced to Mayor Wilson and his wife, who also served as the school board's president. They were visibly relieved to see her alive, and well after hearing about the accident. We were afraid we might have to delay the start of term, Mrs. Wilson confessed. But since you're here, we can proceed as planned. The schoolhouse is ready for you to inspect whenever you feel up to it. I'd like to see it today, if possible, Rebecca replied, eager to focus on the future rather than dwell on her near-tragic arrival. I want to be properly prepared for the children on Monday. The Monticello schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple but well-constructed building with large windows to admit plenty of light. Inside, rows of desks faced a teacher's desk and blackboard. Shelves lined one wall, sparsely populated with books. Our library is limited, Mrs. Wilson apologized, noting Rebecca's gaze. But the town has allocated funds for new books this year. We were hoping you might advise on suitable additions. Rebecca ran her fingers over the worn volume's basic primers, a few classics, a well-thumbed Bible. I would be honored to help build the collection. Every child deserves access to good literature. Mrs. Wilson beamed. I knew we made the right choice in hiring you. Now, there are 28 students enrolled, ranging from 6 to 16 years of age. It's a challenge, certainly, but previous teachers have managed by grouping them according to ability. Rebecca nodded, her mind already formulating teaching strategies. This was familiar territory, the one aspect of her new life that followed her carefully laid plans. As they were leaving the schoolhouse, a rider approached Isaac Newcomb, looking somewhat out of place in his best shirt, his hair still damp from what was clearly a hasty washing. Ladies, he greeted them, tipping his hat. I hope I'm not interrupting. Mrs. Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly, but her smile was genuine. Not at all, Mr. Newcomb. I was just showing Miss Turner the schoolhouse. Will you be joining us for the welcome supper at the hotel tonight? If I'm invited, he replied, his eyes meeting Rebecca's. "Of course," Mrs. Wilson assured him. 7 o'clock sharp. The whole town will be there to meet our new teacher." With a meaningful glance between the two, she excused herself, leaving Rebecca and Isaac alone outside the schoolhouse. "You look more yourself today," Isaac observed. "The color's back in your cheeks." Rebecca smiled, touched by his notice. "I feel more myself. Everyone has been extraordinarily kind." "Monticello folk take care of their own," Isaac said. Then, seeming to realize the implication of his words, he added hastily, "And you're one of us now." "Yes, I suppose I am," Rebecca agreed, finding she liked the idea more than she expected. After the loneliness following her father's death, the sense of belonging was welcome. Isaac cleared his throat. "I managed to recover some items from your wagon. The creek washed it downstream a ways, but a few things were salvageable." He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small, waterlogged leather case. "This seemed personal. I thought you might want it straight away." Rebecca gasped as she recognized her father's case, the one containing his pocket watch, her mother's locket, and a few treasured family photographs. "Oh, Isaac, I thought it lost forever." In her excitement, she used his given name without thinking, then blushed at her forwardness. He didn't seem to mind. "I'm glad I could return it to you, Rebecca." The way he said her name with such quiet sincerity sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She opened the case with trembling fingers, relieved to find the contents mostly intact, though water-stained. "These are irreplaceable," she said softly, touching her mother's locket. "Thank you." Isaac shifted his weight, looking unusually hesitant. "I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you to the welcome supper tonight, unless you'd prefer to arrive with Mrs. Abernathy." "I would be delighted to accept your escort," Rebecca replied, surprised by how much the prospect pleased her. His face brightened. "I'll call for you at 6:45 then." As he rode away, Rebecca clutched the leather case to her chest, a strange sensation of rightness settling over her. Perhaps her new beginning in Monticello would be even more transformative than she had imagined. The welcome supper at Monticello's Grand Hotel, a somewhat generous name for the two-story establishment, introduced Rebecca to what seemed like the entire town. Merchants, ranchers, the town doctor, the banker and his wife, and countless others whose names blurred together shook her hand and offered words of welcome throughout it all. Isaac remained at her side, a steady presence that calmed her nerves. He seemed well respected among the townspeople, though Rebecca noticed a certain reserve in his interactions, as if he kept a part of himself deliberately apart. "Mr. Newcomb doesn't come to town often," Mrs. Abernathy confided during a momentary lull. "Keeps to himself mostly, except for church and necessary business. It's caused quite a stir seeing him so sociable tonight." Rebecca glanced across the room where Isaac stood talking with the mayor. "He seems well liked, though." "Oh, he's respected right enough. Finest cattle in the territory, and he's fair in his dealings. But there's been sorrow in his life that's made him cautious with people." Mrs. Abernathy leaned closer. "Lost his wife and child in childbirth before coming west. Some say that's what drove him to leave everything behind and start fresh here." Rebecca's heart constricted at this revelation. No wonder there was a shadow behind his smile, sometimes a depth of understanding in his eyes when she spoke of her own losses. "I shouldn't be gossiping, Mrs." Abernathy straightened, looking contrite. "But I thought you should know, given his apparent interest in you. Isaac Newcomb is a good man, but wounded still, in ways that might not be obvious." Rebecca nodded, grateful for the insight yet troubled by it. The knowledge added a layer of complexity to her growing feelings for her rescuer. When Isaac returned to her side, she found herself studying him more closely, noticing the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the way his smile never quite reached their blue depths. Yet there was strength there too, resilience forged through suffering. "You look tired," he observed as the evening wore on. "Would you like me to take you back to the boarding house?" The consideration in his voice touched her. "Yes, please. It's been rather overwhelming meeting everyone at once." As they walked the short distance through town, the night air cool and fragrant with sage, Rebecca gathered her courage. "Mrs. Abernathy mentioned you lost your wife," she said gently. "I'm very sorry." Isaac stiffened slightly, then sighed. "I should have known Monticello's most efficient information network would be at work. Yes, Caroline died 8 years ago along with our son. He never even drew breath." The raw pain in his voice made Rebecca's chest ache. "I didn't mean to pry." "No, it's all right." Isaac's pace slowed. "In some ways, it's a relief that you know. People here have learned not to mention it, which sometimes makes it feel as if Caroline never existed at all." "Would you tell me about her?" Rebecca asked softly. For a moment she thought he might refuse. Then he began to speak, his voice low and measured. "She was the daughter of my father's business partner. We grew up together, always expected to marry someday. She was gentle, kind, loved music and painting. When she died, I couldn't bear to stay in Baltimore. Every street, every room in my family's home reminded me of her." "So you came west?" Isaac nodded. "I needed to be somewhere completely different, somewhere with no memories. The first few years were difficult. But the work helped. The physical exhaustion, the constant demands of building something from nothing." They had reached the boarding house steps, but neither moved to climb them, reluctant to end this moment of unexpected intimacy. "I understand," Rebecca said finally. "After my father died, I couldn't stay in our home either. Too many empty chairs, too many conversations that would never continue." Isaac studied her face in the moonlight. "We're alike in that way, I think, both seeking new beginnings." "Yes," Rebecca agreed, feeling a connection to this man that transcended their brief acquaintance. "Though I never expected mine to begin by falling into a creek." His laugh was warm in the cool night air. "Providence works in mysterious ways, Miss Turner." "Indeed it does, Mr. Newcomb." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for telling me about Caroline. I'm honored by your trust." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a lowering of a guard long maintained. "Thank you for asking about her. Most people are afraid to speak of those we've lost, not understanding that sometimes remembering is exactly what we need." When he left her at the boarding house door, Rebecca watched him walk away. A curious feeling of anticipation building within her, a sense that her life in Monticello would be inextricably linked with Isaac Newcomb's, in ways she couldn't yet foresee. The first day of school arrived with perfect autumn weather, crisp, clear, and full of possibility. Rebecca stood at the schoolhouse door, greeting each student by name as they arrived, having memorized the enrollment list provided by Mrs. Wilson. By mid-morning, she was deeply engrossed in assessing her pupils' abilities, grouping them according to their rating and arithmetic skills. The older boys, initially skeptical of the refined Eastern lady, were won over when she demonstrated an unexpected knowledge of practical mathematics by calculating the carrying capacity of the local watershed, a problem that had relevance to their ranch work. At noon, the children spilled outside for their lunch break. Rebecca was arranging books for the afternoon's history lesson when a knock at the door revealed Isaac, holding a small wooden crate. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, looking somewhat uncertain. "Not at all." "The children are at lunch." She smiled, genuinely pleased to see him. "What brings you to town on a Monday?" He set the crate on her desk. "I found a few more of your belongings that washed downstream. Thought you might need them before my next planned visit." Rebecca opened the crate to find several books waterlogged but recognizable, along with a writing case and a small framed photograph of her parents on their wedding day. "Oh, Isaac," she exclaimed, carefully lifting the photograph. "This is wonderful. I thought it lost forever." His face brightened at her reaction. "I've spread the word among the ranchers to keep an eye out for anything that might have been carried downriver. Never know what might turn up." "You're very thoughtful," Rebecca said, touched by his continued efforts on her behalf. Isaac glanced around the schoolroom, taking in the neatly arranged desks and the lesson written on the blackboard. "How are you finding your first day?" "Challenging but rewarding," she replied honestly. "The children are eager to learn, though their previous education has been somewhat inconsistent." "Mrs. Wilson did her best," Isaac said diplomatically. Rebecca laughed. "She certainly did, and now I shall do mine." She hesitated, then asked, "Will you be in town long?" A slight smile played at his lips. "I have some business with the mercantile, but I thought I might wait and walk you back to the boarding house after school, if that would be agreeable." "Very agreeable," she answered, perhaps too quickly, earning a broader smile from Isaac. The afternoon lessons passed in a blur, Rebecca's awareness of Isaac's presence in town adding an undercurrent of anticipation to her teaching. When the final bell rang and the children had been dismissed, she found him waiting outside, conversing easily with several parents. As they walked through town together, Rebecca was acutely conscious of the glances they attracted. In a small community like Monticello, their growing friendship would not go unnoticed or uncommented upon. "I feel like we're providing the town with its most interesting gossip in months," she observed wryly. Isaac chuckled. "Likely years. Nothing much happens in Monticello that hasn't happened before. Except Eastern school teachers falling into creeks to be rescued by reclusive ranchers," she suggested, eyes twinkling. "Exactly that," he agreed, his expression warming as he looked at her. "You know, I've been thinking about your situation, losing all your belongings and starting fresh. My foreman's wife is handy with a needle. If you'd like, she could help you replace some of your wardrobe. She's about your size." The thoughtfulness of the offer touched Rebecca deeply. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose." "Sarah would be delighted," Isaac assured her. "She doesn't get many opportunities to sew for anyone but her children and husband. Actually, I was hoping you might consider visiting the ranch this Sunday after church. Martha's been asking after you, and it would give you a chance to speak with Sarah about the clothing." The invitation sent a pleasant flutter through Rebecca's chest. "I'd like that very much." Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. Isaac would find reasons to be in town several times a week, often coinciding with the end of the school day. Their walks to the boarding house became a regular occurrence, marked by conversations that ranged from literature to ranching, from childhood memories to philosophical debates. Rebecca found herself looking forward to these walks with an eagerness that both exhilarated and alarmed her. She was developing feelings for Isaac Newcomb that went far beyond gratitude or friendship, feelings that made her heart race when she caught sight of him waiting outside the schoolhouse. That caused her to take extra care with her appearance each morning on the chance she might see him that day. Sunday visits to the Newcomb ranch became a highlight of her week. Martha always prepared special meals, and Rebecca found genuine friendship with Sarah, the foreman's wife, who indeed helped her create a new wardrobe suited to her life in Wyoming. It was during one of these Sunday visits, nearly 2 months after her arrival in Monticello, that Rebecca found herself alone with Isaac for the first time in weeks. They were walking the property's boundary, the late October sun casting long shadows across the golden prairie grass. "You seem at home here," Isaac observed, watching as she breathed deeply of the sage-scented air. "I am," Rebecca replied, surprising herself with the certainty of her response. I never expected to feel so settled so quickly, especially after such a dramatic beginning. But Monticello already feels more like home than Boston ever did after Father died. Isaac stopped walking, turning to face her. The wind ruffled his dark hair, and something in his expression made Rebecca's breath catch. "Rebecca," he began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I need to say something that may be presumptuous. If so, I hope you'll forgive me." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes. These past weeks, seeing you become part of Monticello, watching how you care for your students, getting to know the woman behind the teacher. It's awakened feelings in me I thought were buried forever." He took a deep breath. "I find myself thinking about you, constantly wondering what book you're reading, how your day went, what made you smile." Rebecca stood very still, afraid that any movement might break the spell of this moment. "I know it's soon," Isaac continued, "and I wouldn't rush you for the world. But I wanted you to know that my intentions toward you are serious and honorable, if there's any chance you might someday return my feelings." "I already do," Rebecca whispered, her voice carrying on the wind. "Return your feelings, that is. I have for some time now." The joy that transformed Isaac's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, sudden, radiant, and utterly beautiful. He reached for her hands, holding them gently between his own. "I never thought I'd find this again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "After Caroline, I believed that part of me was gone forever. Then you fell from that wagon into the creek, and something inside me that had been sleeping for 8 years suddenly woke up." Rebecca squeezed his hands. "When you pulled me from the water and said I wasn't drowning on your watch, I was too frightened to realize it, but that was the moment my life truly changed course." He lifted one hand to her cheek, his touch reverent. "May I court you properly, Rebecca Turner? With Mrs. Abernathy's approval and the town's inevitable scrutiny?" She laughed, leaning slightly into his touch. "Yes, Isaac Newcomb, though I suspect the town has been watching us court for weeks already." His answering smile held a promise of things to come, of shared days and quiet evenings, of building something lasting and true together. As the prairie wind swirled around them, Rebecca felt as if her life had finally found its proper direction, flowing as surely as the creek that had nearly claimed her life, yet led her to this man instead. Winter descended upon Wyoming Territory with fierce determination, bringing howling winds and snow that transformed the landscape into a vast white sea. Rebecca's days were filled with teaching, her evenings often spent in Isaac's company, when weather permitted his visits to town. The schoolhouse, heated by a temperamental stove that required constant attention, became a haven of learning despite the cold. Rebecca found herself constantly improvising, adapting Eastern teaching methods to the realities of Western life. When blizzards kept many children home, she taught the town children who could safely walk to school. When supplies ran short, she created learning materials from whatever was available. Isaac's admiration for her resourcefulness was evident in his expression when he visited the school one particularly bitter December afternoon, arriving with a sled loaded with firewood. "The mayor mentioned the school's wood supply was running low," he explained as he stacked logs beside the stove. "Thought I'd save the town the trouble of sending someone out to the timber stand in this weather." Rebecca dismissed her remaining pupils early, using the excuse of the cold but secretly wanting time alone with Isaac. As the last child bundled up and departed, she closed the schoolhouse door against the howling wind. "That was thoughtful of you," she said, warming her hands by the freshly stoked stove. "Though I suspect it was as much an excuse to see me as it was charity to the school board." Isaac's eyes crinkled with amusement as he removed his gloves. Guilty as charged. It's been 3 days since I've seen you, and that's 3 days too many. The frankness of his admission warmed her more effectively than the stove. Their courtship, now officially recognized by the town, had progressed with a steady sureness that felt both exciting and comfortingly right. "I've missed you too," Rebecca confessed, moving to stand beside him. "The evenings seem especially long when you can't visit." Isaac took her hand, his fingers strong and warm around hers. "I've been thinking about those long evenings and all the winters to come." His expression grew serious. "Rebecca, I know we haven't been courting long by Eastern standards, but out here, life moves at a different pace. We don't have the luxury of lengthy engagements when blizzards can isolate us for weeks." Rebecca's heart began to race as she realized where his words were leading. "What I'm trying to say, rather inelegantly," Isaac continued, "is that I love you. I want to share my life with you, not just stolen moments between your teaching and my ranching, but every moment, every day and night." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that glinted in the lamplight, a gold ring set with a modest diamond. "This was my mother's. I had Tom take it to Cheyenne to be resized for you." Rebecca stared at the ring, her vision blurring with unexpected tears. "Isaac." He dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Rebecca Turner, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? I promise to cherish you, protect you, and love you for all the days of my life." "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Isaac, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. When he stood and drew her into his arms, his kiss was tender yet filled with promise, a promise of a shared future, of a love that had found them both when neither was looking. The news of their engagement spread through Monticello faster than a prairie fire. Mrs. Abernathy, despite her initial concerns about propriety, was among the first to offer congratulations. The school board called an emergency meeting to discuss Rebecca's contract, ultimately agreeing that she could continue teaching through the end of the school year, with the understanding that she would reside at the Newcomb Ranch after the wedding. "They're just relieved you're not leaving them teacher less midterm," Isaac teased as they discussed the board's decision over supper at the hotel restaurant, a rare treat he had insisted upon to celebrate their engagement. "I would never abandon my students," Rebecca assured him, though her mind was already contemplating the adjustments her new role would require. "But I confess, I'm looking forward to being done with Mrs. Abernathy's 6 o'clock curfew and prohibition against gentlemen callers after supper." Isaac's eyes darkened slightly at her words, and he reached across the table to take her hand. 2 months seems an eternity to wait. They had agreed on a February wedding after the worst of winter's fury, but before the spring demands of calving season would keep Isaac tied to the ranch. It was a practical decision, like so many in Western life. Yet Rebecca found herself counting the days with growing impatience. Christmas brought a brief respite from the winter isolation, as the entire town gathered at the church for a special service and community celebration. Rebecca, seated beside Isaac in the pew they now shared each Sunday, felt a profound sense of belonging as she looked around at the faces that had become familiar and dear in her short time in Monticello. After the service, as they mingled in the church hall decorated with pine boughs and candles, Mayor Wilson raised his glass in a toast to the engaged couple. "To Isaac and Rebecca," he declared, "whose unusual first meeting reminds us that sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways even through near drownings." Laughter rippled through the crowd, and Isaac squeezed Rebecca's hand as they acknowledged the toast. The light-hearted reference to their dramatic introduction no longer brought back fear, but instead reminded Rebecca of how fortuitous that terrifying moment had been. Later, as Isaac drove her back to the boarding house in his sleigh, the night sky ablaze with stars and their breath forming clouds in the frigid air, he presented her with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Merry Christmas," he said, his voice soft as she carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate design of wildflowers. "Oh, Isaac, it's beautiful. I thought you might want to record your adventures in your new home," he explained. "Our home, soon enough." Rebecca traced the flowers with her fingertips, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I have something for you as well." She reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a flat package. Isaac unwrapped it to reveal a silver pocket watch, not new but polished to a high shine. "Rebecca, this is too much." "It was my father's," she explained. "One of the few things recovered from the wagon. I had Mr. Peterson, the jeweler, clean and repair it. Open it." Inside the case, beneath the watch face, she had placed a small daguerreotype of herself that Mrs. Wilson had arranged to have taken in town. "So you'll always have me with you, even when you're out on the range," she said, suddenly shy about the sentimentality of the gift. Isaac's eyes shone in the moonlight as he carefully closed the watch and tucked it into his vest pocket, directly over his heart. "It's perfect," he said, drawing her close. "Just like you." Their kiss, sweet and lingering beneath the vast Wyoming sky, sealed the promise of the Christmas yet to come there first as husband and wife. January brought the worst blizzard in living memory, burying Monticello under feet of snow and effectively cutting the town off from surrounding ranches for nearly 2 weeks. Rebecca worried constantly about Isaac, knowing he would be working tirelessly to protect his cattle from the killing cold. When he finally made it to town, riding a horse that looked as exhausted as he did, she ran from the schoolhouse without even pausing to grab her coat, heedless of the stares from her students. "You're safe," she breathed as he dismounted, his face weather-beaten and drawn with fatigue. "I've been so worried." Isaac gathered her into his arms, seeming to draw strength from her presence. "It's been a hell of a fight," he admitted, his voice rough. "Lost some cattle, but most made it through." She led him into the schoolhouse, where the children watched wide-eyed as the formidable rancher collapsed into a chair by the stove, accepting the cup of hot coffee Rebecca poured from her personal pot. "Class, continue with your reading silently," she instructed, her attention never leaving Isaac's face. "Mr. Newcomb needs a moment of rest." The children, many of whom were ranch kids themselves and understood the gravity of the situation, bent obediently to their books. "You shouldn't have risked the journey," Rebecca scolded gently, kneeling beside his chair. "The passes could have been completely blocked." Isaac managed a tired smile. "I had to see you, make sure you were all right. Besides, the wedding's in 3 weeks." Needed to confirm that the preacher's still planning to perform the ceremony. The fact that he had thought of their wedding even while battling to save his livelihood touched Rebecca deeply. "Of course I'm all right, and the wedding could wait if necessary." "Not a day longer than planned," Isaac insisted, some of his usual determination returning to his voice. "I've waited long enough to make you my wife." Despite the blizzard's aftermath and the difficult conditions, preparations for the wedding continued. The ladies of Monticello rallied around Rebecca, led by Mrs. Wilson and Martha, helping to create a wedding dress from the finest fabric available at the mercantile. Sarah contributed a delicate lace veil that had been her grandmother's, fulfilling the something borrowed tradition. The day before the wedding, Rebecca closed the schoolhouse early and found herself standing alone in the empty room, looking around at the space that had become so much a part of her identity. Tomorrow, she would become Mrs. Isaac Newcomb, and while she would continue teaching until the term's end, everything would be different. She would return to this room as a married woman, riding in from the ranch each day, her nights spent in Isaac's arms rather than in Mrs. Abernathy's spare bedroom. The thought sent a shiver of anticipation through her, a mixture of nervousness and longing that had been growing stronger as the wedding approached. A knock at the door interrupted her reflections. She opened it to find Martha, wrapped in a heavy coat and scarf. "Thought I might find you here," the older woman said, stomping snow from her boots as she entered. "Isaac sent me to fetch you, said you'd likely be wool-gathering in the schoolhouse instead of preparing for tomorrow." Rebecca laughed, recognizing the truth in his assessment. "He knows me well already." Martha's expression softened. "That he does, and he loves you for it." She bustled about, helping Rebecca gather her things. "I wanted a moment alone with you before tomorrow's festivities. There's something I think you should know." Rebecca paused in putting on her coat. "Is something wrong?" "No, dear, quite the opposite." Martha sat on the edge of a student desk. "I've worked for Isaac since he first came to Wyoming, saw him through those dark early days when he barely spoke, barely ate, just worked himself to exhaustion from dawn to dusk. I watched as, year by year, he built the ranch, built a life, but always with something missing." She reached out to touch Rebecca's hand. "I never thought I'd see him truly happy again. Then he brought you home that day, dripping wet and half drowned, and something changed. At first I thought it was just the excitement of the rescue, but then I saw how he looked at you across the supper table like a man seeing the sun after years of darkness." Rebecca blinked back sudden tears, moved by Martha's words. "You've brought him back to life, Rebecca," Martha concluded simply. "And I wanted to thank you for that before you became my employer's wife tomorrow." "Oh, Martha," Rebecca said, impulsively embracing the woman who had shown her such kindness from the beginning. "I'm the one who should be thankful. If not for Isaac, I would have drowned in that creek. Instead, I found a home and a love I never expected." The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with sunlight sparkling on the fresh snow that blanketed Monticello. The entire town seemed to pause its normal activities, focusing instead on the event that had become a community celebration. In Mrs. Abernathy's best guest room, Rebecca stood before the mirror as Mrs. Wilson made final adjustments to her dress, a creation of ivory silk with lace trim at the collar and cuffs. Her auburn hair was arranged in an elegant knot, adorned with small white flowers that Sarah had somehow procured despite the winter season. "You look beautiful, Mrs. Abernathy declared, her usually stern expression softened by genuine affection. "Isaac Newcomb is a fortunate man indeed." Rebecca smiled at her reflection, hardly recognizing the radiant woman who looked back at her. 6 months ago, she had been a grief-stricken daughter liquidating her father's estate in Boston. Now she was a respected teacher, a beloved community member, and within hours would be a wife. The transformation seemed almost miraculous. "It's time," Mrs. Wilson announced, checking her watch. "The church is full to bursting. I don't think a single soul in Monticello or the surrounding ranches is missing this wedding." Mayor Wilson was waiting at the foot of the stairs to escort Rebecca to the church, having offered to stand in for her father. "Miss Turner," he said, his voice catching slightly as she descended, "I am honored to walk beside you today." The short journey to the church seemed to pass in a dream. Rebecca was vaguely aware of townspeople lining the path, smiling and nodding as she passed. But her focus was entirely on what awaited her inside the small white building with its modest steeple. When the church doors opened, and she stepped inside on Mayor Wilson's arm, the assembled guests rose as one. Rebecca barely noticed them. Her eyes were fixed on Isaac, standing tall and straight at the altar, his expression one of wonder as he watched her approach. He had never looked more handsome, dressed in a new black suit with a crisp white shirt. But it was the love shining in his eyes that took her breath away, a love so powerful and pure that it seemed to illuminate him from within. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Rebecca heard herself repeating the vows, felt Isaac's hand steady and warm as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger to join her engagement ring. When the preacher finally pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac's kiss was both tender and possessive, a promise of the life they would build together. The celebration afterward at the hotel was a joyous affair, with music provided by local musicians and a feast prepared by the combined efforts of Monticello's finest cooks. Rebecca found herself passed from one well-wisher to another, accepting congratulations and advice from married women, teasing comments from the ranchers who had become Isaac's friends, despite his previously reclusive nature. Through it all, Isaac remained close by, his hand often finding hers, his eyes seeking her out across the crowded room. There was a new ease to his bearing, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. When they finally stepped onto the dance floor for the traditional first dance, he drew her closer than propriety typically allowed. "Mrs. Newcomb," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "I've been waiting all day to call you that." Rebecca smiled up at him, feeling the rightness of her new name. "I'm not sure I'll ever tire of hearing it." As they swayed to the music, the faces of their friends and neighbors blurring around them, Isaac's expression grew serious. "I want you to know something, Rebecca. I loved Caroline truly, and I always will honor her memory. But what I feel for you, it's different, deeper somehow. You haven't replaced her in my heart. You've claimed a place entirely your own." Tears pricked at Rebecca's eyes at his heartfelt words. "Thank you for telling me that," she whispered. "I would never ask you to forget her." "I know," he said simply. "That's part of why I love you." The journey to the ranch later that night was made in companionable silence, both of them wrapped in warm blankets in Isaac's sleigh, the moonlight casting blue shadows on the snow-covered landscape. Rebecca leaned against his shoulder, content to listen to the steady rhythm of the horses' hooves and the occasional jingle of harness bells. When they arrived, the ranch house glowed with welcoming light. Martha had gone ahead to prepare for their return, and Rebecca could see through the windows that the home had been transformed, fresh candles burning, a fire blazing in the hearth, and flowers somehow, impossibly, there were flowers on the mantel. Isaac helped her from the sleigh, then surprised her by sweeping her into his arms. "Tradition," he explained with a smile as he carried her across the threshold. Inside, Rebecca discovered more of Martha's thoughtful preparations, a light supper laid out in the dining room, a bottle of wine uncorked and breathing, and the master bedroom made up with fresh linens and more of the mysterious winter flowers. "She's outdone herself," Rebecca said, touched by the housekeeper's efforts to make their homecoming special. "Martha's been planning this since the day I proposed," Isaac admitted, helping Rebecca remove her cloak. "She left a note saying she's staying with Sarah and Tom tonight to give us privacy." The implication sent a rush of heat to Rebecca's cheeks, though they had discussed this aspect of marriage frankly during their engagement. Isaac, sensitive to her inexperience, had promised patience and tenderness. "Are you hungry?" he asked, gesturing toward the waiting meal. Rebecca shook her head, suddenly too nervous for food. "Perhaps a little wine." Isaac poured 2 glasses, handing one to her with a steadying smile. "To beginnings," he toasted, his eyes never leaving hers. "To beginnings," she echoed, sipping the ruby liquid and feeling its warmth spread through her. They talked quietly for a while, sitting before the fire, the conversation keeping at bay the awareness of what was to come. Finally, Isaac set aside his empty glass and took her hand. "Rebecca," he said softly, "I want tonight to be perfect for you, if you're not ready or if you're too tired after today's excitement." She silenced him by placing her fingers gently against his lips. "I'm ready, Isaac. I want to be your wife in every way." The tenderness with which he led her to their bedroom, for it was theirs now, not just his, brought fresh tears to her eyes. And later, when they lay together in the darkness, their bodies learning the ancient dance of husband and wife, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that the creek's current had carried her exactly where she was meant to be. Spring arrived in Wyoming with its characteristic fickleness, warm, golden days interspersed with sudden snowstorms that reminded everyone that winter never surrendered easily in this territory. For Rebecca, the changing season brought new rhythms and adjustments as she balanced her roles as teacher and rancher's wife. Each morning, she rose before dawn to share breakfast with Isaac before he headed out to the pastures. Then she would hitch the buggy he had given her as a wedding gift and make the journey to town, where her students awaited. The afternoons saw her return to the ranch, often helping Martha with dinner preparations before grading papers at the large oak desk Isaac had installed in the study specifically for her use. The evenings were the sweetest times when she and Isaac would sit together before the fire, reading or talking about their days. Sometimes he would play the fiddle, a talent he had kept hidden until their marriage, while she mended or worked on lesson plans. These quiet moments of domestic harmony were precious to them both, a healing balm for souls that had known too much solitude. As the school year drew to a close, Rebecca found herself contemplating the future. The school board had made it clear they hoped she would return in the fall, but the 8-mile journey each day was becoming increasingly taxing as spring rains turned the roads to mud. Additionally, she had begun to suspect a change in her physical condition, one that would make continued teaching challenging, if not impossible. It was on a particularly beautiful May evening, with the sunset painting the prairie in shades of gold and purple, that Rebecca decided to share her suspicions with Isaac. They were sitting on the porch swing he had built for her birthday, watching as the ranch hands drove the cattle into the home pasture for the night. "Isaac," she began, her fingers nervously pleating the fabric of her skirt, "I've been meaning to tell you something important." He turned to her, his expression immediately concerned. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "Not unwell exactly." She took a deep breath. "I believe I'm with child, our child." For a moment Isaac stared at her, his face unreadable. Then, with a whoop that startled the nearby horses, he lifted her from the swing and spun her in a circle. "A baby, we're having a baby," Rebecca laughed, clinging to his shoulders. "Yes, though I'm not absolutely certain yet. My monthly hasn't come for 2 cycles, and I've been feeling different, tired in a way that's new to me, and certain foods suddenly seem unappetizing." Isaac set her gently back on her feet, his hands cradling her face. "How long have you suspected?" "A few weeks," she admitted. "I wanted to be more sure before I told you, especially given your past." Understanding softened his features. "You were worried about reminding me of Caroline." "Yes," Rebecca confessed. "I didn't want to cause you pain." Isaac drew her close, his heartbeat steady and strong against her cheek. "Rebecca, my love, this news brings me nothing but joy. Yes, there will always be a shadow of what happened before, but it doesn't diminish my happiness about our child." He placed a gentle hand on her still flat abdomen. "When do you think the baby will come, doctor?" "Sanders says likely late November, based on my calculations." Isaac's smile was radiant. "A Thanksgiving baby. How appropriate. I have so much to be thankful for this year." The news of Rebecca's pregnancy spread quickly through Monticello, prompting a flurry of congratulatory visits and practical gifts from the community that had embraced her so warmly. The school board, after initial disappointment that she wouldn't be returning in the fall, organized a search for a replacement teacher and a farewell celebration for their beloved Mrs. Newcomb. As spring gave way to summer, Rebecca's body changed with the seasons. Isaac watched these changes with a mixture of wonder and protective concern, insisting she reduce her activities as her pregnancy advanced. Rebecca, accustomed to independence, initially resisted his fussing, but soon found herself grateful for his care as the summer heat made even simple tasks exhausting. One stifling July afternoon, as Rebecca rested in the shade of the porch while Isaac reviewed cattle tallies with his foreman, Martha emerged from the house with a glass of cool lemonade. "You're looking peaked, dear," the housekeeper observed, handing Rebecca the drink. "Perhaps you should lie down properly in the bedroom where it's cooler." Rebecca smiled gratefully. "I'm fine, Martha, truly, just a bit warm." She sipped the tart liquid, savoring its coolness. "Besides, I like watching Isaac work. He's different with the men, more commanding somehow." "It's quite attractive." Martha chuckled, following Rebecca's gaze to where Isaac stood, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal sun-browned forearms, gesturing as he explained something to Tom. "He is in his element here," she agreed. "But he's changed since you came, Rebecca. Softer in some ways, stronger in others." Rebecca nodded, understanding exactly what Martha meant. She had seen the transformation in her husband over the past year, watched as the grief that had once defined him receded, making room for joy and hope to flourish. "I worry sometimes," Rebecca confessed, her hand moving instinctively to rest on her growing belly, "about the birth. Not for myself, but for him. If something were to happen—" Martha's weathered hand covered Rebecca's. "Nothing will happen," she said firmly. "You're young and healthy, and Dr. Sanders is a fine physician. But even if complications arise, Isaac is stronger now. He has you to thank for that." Rebecca wished she could share Martha's confidence. As her pregnancy progressed, she found herself increasingly anxious about the birth. Wyoming was not Boston. Medical care was limited, and childbirth remained dangerous even in the best circumstances. She kept these fears from Isaac, not wanting to add to the worries she knew he already harbored, but they haunted her dreams. In late September, as the first hint of autumn crispness touched the air, Isaac surprised Rebecca with an unexpected proposal. "I've been thinking," he said as they prepared for bed one night, "that we should consider spending the last month before the baby comes in Cheyenne." Rebecca paused in brushing her hair, turning to face him. "Cheyenne? But why?" Isaac sat beside her on the edge of the bed, taking the brush from her hands to continue the soothing strokes through her long auburn tresses. "They have a proper hospital there, with doctors who specialize in difficult births. We could take rooms at the hotel near the hospital, starting in late October." The care behind his suggestion touched her deeply. "You've been worried too," she realized. Isaac nodded, his fingers gentle as they worked through a tangle in her hair. "I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you, Rebecca. The ranch can manage without me for a few weeks if it means ensuring your safety and our child's." Rebecca turned to embrace him, her expanded middle pressing against his solid warmth. "Thank you," she whispered against his neck. "I've been so afraid, but I didn't want to worry you." "We're partners in this life," Isaac reminded her, his hands moving in soothing circles on her back. "Your fears are mine to carry too." Their plans set in motion, October found them journeying to Cheyenne, where Isaac had arranged comfortable accommodations at the city's finest hotel. Rebecca was initially reluctant to leave the ranch and the home they had made together, but as her due date approached, she found herself grateful for the proximity to medical care and the comforts the city offered. Dr. Alina Wright, one of the few female physicians in the territory and a specialist in obstetrics, took charge of Rebecca's care, her confident manner and extensive knowledge easing many of the expectant mother's fears. "You're in excellent health, Mrs. Newcomb," Dr. Wright assured her after a thorough examination. "The baby is positioned perfectly, and all signs point to an uncomplicated delivery." Isaac, who had insisted on being present for the consultation, despite the unconventional nature of his request, visibly relaxed at the doctor's assessment. "And you'll be available when the time comes," he pressed. "Day or night," Dr. Wright promised. "I've already informed the hospital staff to send for me immediately when Mrs. Newcomb begins her labor." The days of waiting stretched into weeks. Rebecca, unable to engage in her usual activities, filled her time with reading and preparing for the baby's arrival, while Isaac divided his attention between caring for his wife and making brief trips back to the ranch to ensure all was well in his absence. It was during one such trip, with Rebecca nearly a week past her expected due date, that the first contractions began. Initially, she dismissed the discomfort as the false pains Dr. Wright had warned might precede true labor. But as the afternoon progressed and the intervals between pains grew shorter and more intense, Rebecca realized her time had come. Thankfully, Martha had accompanied them to Cheyenne and was with her when labor began in earnest. The older woman sent immediately for Dr. Wright, then dispatched a telegram to the ranch for Isaac. "The baby won't wait for its father," Martha told Rebecca as she helped her through a particularly strong contraction. "Babies come on their own schedule, not ours." Rebecca nodded, unable to speak as another wave of pain washed over her. Her fear had been replaced by a strange, focused determination, a primal instinct to bring her child safely into the world. Dr. Wright arrived promptly, her calm efficiency a balm to Rebecca's frayed nerves. "First babies often take their time," she explained, helping Rebecca into a more comfortable position. "We have hours yet before things become serious." But Rebecca's baby had other ideas. The labor progressed with unexpected speed, the contractions increasing in intensity and frequency until Rebecca was certain she couldn't endure another moment. "I need Isaac," she gasped between pains. "He should be here." "He's on his way," Martha assured her, wiping Rebecca's brow with a cool cloth. "The telegram was sent hours ago." As twilight deepened into night, Rebecca's world narrowed to the rhythm of contractions and the encouraging voices of the women attending her. Dr. Wright's instructions became more urgent, her experienced hands guiding the baby's passage. "I can see the head," the doctor announced. "One more push, Rebecca. Your child is almost here." With a final, monumental effort, Rebecca felt her body release the precious burden it had carried for 9 months. A moment of silence was followed by the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, the lusty cry of a newborn taking its first breath. "A son," Dr. Wright declared, placing the squirming, red-faced infant on Rebecca's chest. "A perfect son." Tears streamed down Rebecca's face as she gazed at her child, overwhelmed by a love so fierce and immediate that it took her breath away. "Hello, little one," she whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "I've been waiting so long to meet you." The door burst open, revealing Isaac, still in his traveling clothes, his face haggard with worry and exhaustion. He froze at the sight before him, Rebecca, pale but radiant, cradling a small bundle against her breast. "You're here," Rebecca said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Come meet your son." Isaac approached the bed as if in a dream, his eyes never leaving the tiny face nested against Rebecca's body. When he reached them, he sank to his knees beside the bed, one trembling hand reaching out to touch the downy head. "A son," he repeated in wonder. "Our son." Rebecca shifted the baby so Isaac could see him better. "I thought we might name him Thomas after my father, Thomas Isaac Newcomb." Isaac looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's perfect. He's perfect." His gaze returned to the infant who had opened his eyes newborn blue but with a shape that promised they might one day match his father's. "Hello, Thomas. I'm your father." The simple declaration, spoken with such tender pride, made Rebecca's heart swell. This was what she had feared might be taken from them, this precious moment of a family newly formed, bound by love and blood. As Dr. Wright and Martha quietly left the room to give the new family privacy, Rebecca watched Isaac gather their son into his strong, capable hands, holding the tiny body with infinite care against his chest. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion as he met her gaze. "For this gift. For our family. For saving me when I didn't even know I needed saving." "We saved each other," Rebecca corrected gently, reaching to touch his face. "From the moment you pulled me from that creek." Isaac leaned down to kiss her, their son cradled safely between them. "You're not drowning on my watch," he whispered against her lips, echoing the words that had marked the beginning of their journey together. "Not then, not ever." As the stars wheeled overhead in the vast Wyoming sky, the Newcomb family began their first night together, a rancher who had found love when he least expected it, a teacher who had discovered home in an unfamiliar land, and their son, born of a love that had begun with a fall from a wagon into a creek on a summer day that now seemed destined rather than accidental. In the years that followed, the Newcomb ranch prospered and grew, much like the family that called it home. Thomas was joined by a sister, Caroline Martha, named for the women whose spirits seemed to watch over their family. Later came another son, William James, whose arrival coincided with the territory's transition to statehood. Rebecca never returned to formal teaching, but her educational influence extended throughout the county as she established a lending library on the ranch, open to all neighboring families. During the winter months, she held informal classes for ranch children unable to reach town through the snow, ensuring that education remained available even in the harshest conditions. Isaac expanded his holdings, eventually becoming one of the most successful ranchers in the state. His fair business practices and innovative methods earned him respect throughout Wyoming, while his obvious devotion to his wife and children made him the envy of many a lonely cowhand. On warm summer evenings, the family often gathered on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunset paint the prairie in glorious color. Rebecca, her auburn hair now threaded with silver, would sit beside Isaac on the swing he had built so many years before, their hands clasped as naturally as breathing. Sometimes, when the children were occupied with their own pursuits, Isaac would lean close and whisper, "Remember that day at the creek?" And Rebecca would smile, her heart still quickening at his nearness even after decades of marriage. "How could I forget? It was the day my life truly began." They never took for granted the gift they had found in each other, a love born in crisis, tested by challenge, and strengthened through shared joy and sorrow. The waters that had threatened to claim Rebecca's life had instead carried her to her destiny, and Isaac's declaration on that fateful day had become the foundation of their life together. "You're not drowning on my watch." A promise made and kept through all the changing seasons of their lives.